Hello all, welcome to Narayana IAS. This is Sureka Bhaskar presenting to you the daily news analysis. In today's discussion, we will take up the number of topics from The Hindu and the Indian Express which are relevant and important for the UPSC CSE examination. So let us look into the topics. First, we'll be discussing about India-ASEAN to rejig 15-year trade pact where India and ASEAN will negotiate in order to modernize the free trade agreement. Following this, we'll be discussing the global goal on adaptation and the road from Dubai. This is nothing but a framework adopted by the parties after the COP climate change meeting at UAE. The next one will be the Special Force for Security Crowd Management at Jagannath Temple in Puri, where we'll discuss about the Jagannath Temple in detail, its characteristic features and architectural design. Following this, we will look at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees paying gratitude for India for taking care of 142 Rohingyas intercepted in the Andaman. We will discuss about India's refugee policy as well as who are the Rohingyas and the difference between the asylum seekers, refugees, migrants and immigrants. The last news for the day will be women participation in the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, where we'll see increased participation of women to about 59% from the earlier 57% in 2022. The first news for the day is India-ASEAN to rejig 15-year trade pact in early 2024. So this particular news talks about India and ASEAN that will be negotiating by February 2024 in order to modernize the free trade agreement. So this particular topic becomes important as we'll be discussing about India-ASEAN relations and all the regional groupings, not only ASEAN, SAARC, SCO, everything actually becomes important. So this can be mapped to mains GS paper 2, bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interest and can be mapped to current events of national and international importance under prelims. So moving ahead, there have been previous year questions on RCEP as we see here, and they have asked that this particular term is in context or it is in affairs with which of the following groups, and also they have asked about the member nations or which actually have a free trade partners of that of ASEAN. So here regional groupings again becomes very, very important. Moving ahead, as I told you, India and ASEAN will begin negotiations in February 2024 in order to modernize the free trade agreement. This particular free trade agreement is nothing but it is the ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement which was signed in 2009 and which formally came into existence in 2010. So let us see what is the agreement and what is the necessity to revamp the free trade agreement. So here, the Free Trade Agreement, known as the ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement, was signed in the year 2009 and was enforced in 2010. Also, what is the need to revamp this is that India is actually experiencing a high trade deficit with that of the ASEAN region. That is, if you see when the FTA came into existence in 2009, the trade deficit that India had was around $7.5 billion, which has currently ballooned to an amount of $43.5 billion. Also, when we see the export to that of the import ratio of India with the ASEAN region, the export actually amounts to only $44 billion while India imports worth of goods is around $87.57 billion. Moving ahead, the revamping will actually include the changes in the rules of origin. Here we'll be discussing about the rules of origin and in what way it will benefit India. And also, it blocks possible rerouting of goods by China through the ASEAN countries. Now let us understand what is this rules of origin. Now looking into what is rules of origin. Rules of origin is nothing but it is a set criteria that determine the place or origin of a particular good. This is majorly used in free trade agreements in order to determine if a good qualifies for lesser tariffs or sometimes no duty criteria. So here if you see, what you mean by rules of origin is that it is a set criteria that is generally used in free trade agreements that will determine the origin country of a particular good, and it will determine whether a good qualifies for a lesser tariffs criteria or a no duty criteria. So revamping these rules of origin, in what way is it going to benefit India? So benefits of revamping the rules of origin. The first benefit is that it increases the market access for Indian goods. So here, by making stricter rules for goods that qualify as originating from other country, India can make its own goods so that these goods, when they qualify under ROO, they will have lesser tariffs or sometimes duty-free access, and thereby making the Indian goods actually competitive in the global market, and also it will make it buyer-friendly. The second one is blocking rerouting by China. China, actually being the largest exporter, tries to reroute its goods into India via less stringent or lesser stricter ROO rules nations, specifically the Southeast Asian nations, and thereby trying to evade the taxes or the duties. So this particular revamping of the ROO rules will actually increase the market access for the Indian goods, and also it blocks the rerouting of the Chinese goods into India. Moving forward, so let us move into learning about the regional bloc, that is ASEAN. ASEAN stands for Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It is a regional grouping that aims to promote economic and security cooperation among its 10 members. So if you look at this particular map, you can see the different members in the grouping, which include Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Brunei, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia and Philippines. So moving forward, the members, as I told you, are actually seen in this map. So looking at its establishment, it was found in the year 1967 by 5 Southeast Asian nations, which include Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. So now let us look into the significance of ASEAN as well as what relations or ties that India shares with that of ASEAN. So if ASEAN were actually a country, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world. And it also actually houses or inhabits larger population than that of the European Union or North America. Also, in terms of the labor force, it has the 3rd largest labor force in the world, but only after China and India. Moving ahead, what is the significance of ASEAN for India? The first significance is ASEAN's market potential. That is, it is the world's 3rd largest market, which actually offers a significant export opportunity for that of India. Next is development of Northeast India. What happens is when India actually is in collaboration with the ASEAN nations, can actually promote the development of the northeastern states. Moving ahead, if we look at the maritime engagement, Southeast Asian nation actually proves to be a key in tackling the security threats in the region. Specifically, if you see the piracy as well as drug trafficking. Also, when we see the cultural connections, we have the languages as well as the religion of Buddhism as well as Hinduism actually spreading in this region. And also, India's association with the Southeast Asian nations will be beneficial for India to emerge as a geopolitical leader with respect to both India's Act East policy as well as its Indo-Pacific policy. Next one, let us look into the cooperation of India with that of ASEAN over the years. So first one, let's look into the political ties. Actually, India shares a very friendly and a cooperative relationship with that of the Southeast Asian nations. Also, we follow common perspectives on various regional as well as global issues. Moreover, India actively participates in ASEAN-related forums such as the ARF, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, and the East Asia Summit. In 2012, India and ASEAN elevated the relationship to a strategic partnership, and in 2022, it became a comprehensive strategic partnership. And India's Act East policy was initiated in the year 2014. Next one is tourism. India is the first dialogue partner to sign a memorandum of understanding on strengthening tourism cooperation with ASEAN. The next one is economic ties. ASEAN actually ranks among India's major trading partners. And also, ASEAN-India Agreement on Trade in Services and Investment actually came into existence in 2015. Moving ahead, we have the CECA, that is nothing but Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement with several ASEAN countries. Moving on to security and defense, India actually conducts a lot of joint military as well as naval exercises with most of the ASEAN nations. And the ASEAN-India Maritime Exercise took place in 2023. And the ASEAN Plan of Action in Combating Transactional Crime was actually held in 2016 to 2025. Next one, let's look into the challenges in India-ASEAN relations. The first challenge, let's look at the economic as well as the trade challenges. As we already saw, there is a trade imbalance for India with respect to that of the ASEAN region, which we looked in terms of trade deficit as well as its imports exceeding the exports from the region. So first one is high trade deficit in India. The next one is the foreign direct investment. That is, India's FDI in ASEAN actually falls behind China, which is definitely concerning. The next one is competing agreements. We have agreements, that is the free trade agreements like the RCEP as well as the Trans-Pacific Partnership between the countries of the Southeast Asia as well as the other Pacific countries, which actually proves ASEAN to be less effective, or it is claimed to be competing. The next one, let's look into the cooperation engagement challenges. First one is bilateral versus multilateral approach. That is, India always prefers to have a bilateral agreement with each of the Southeast Asian nations or the ASEAN members as against the multilateral agreement. So the preference for this bilateral engagement will weaken the regional integration. Moving on, limited connectivity. So India actually has a very limited connectivity, both physical as well as digital, with that of the Southeast Asian countries because of the rugged terrain. So this in fact affects the trade, investment and people-to-people ties. The next challenge is implementation of connectivity projects where there are significant delays in the projects like the Trilateral Highway and the Kaladan Multimodal Project. Moving ahead is geopolitical and security challenges. The first one is Quad. As we know, Quad is a grouping of India, the US, Australia and Japan. So ASEAN's reluctance to actually embrace this Quad is proving very difficult for India's security goals. Moreover, Indo-Pacific rivalry. There has been a lot of competition and rivalry between major powers in the Indo-Pacific regions, for example, the US and the China, which actually destabilizes this particular region. Moreover, the presence, that is the Chinese presence, limits India's potential in the region. Moving ahead, what shall be the way forward? The first one is the connectivity boost. It is very important to strengthen the land, air and sea links for increased business, investment as well as tourism. The next one is global collaboration. India and ASEAN countries should work together in order to promote their common interests in international and regional forums such as the United Nations. The next one is Quad Plus. Quad, as I told you, is a grouping of 4 countries, that is India, US, Australia and Japan. So this has to be extended to Quad Plus, which will also include the regions of New Zealand, South Korea, etc. Thereby, this will boost the regional influence as well as security. Next is maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. So this is crucial for protection of India's interest as well as that of the ASEAN countries. The next article that we will be discussing here will be Global Goal on Adaptation and the Road from Dubai, which is nothing but a recent framework which has been adopted by the countries at the COP28, which was held at Dubai. So here this topic is relevant from Mains GS Paper 3, Environmental Pollution and Degradation, Conservation and Disaster Management, and can be mapped to climate change under Prelims. So let us discuss about the COP28, what is UNFCCC, the climate change, and the difference between mitigation and adaptation. So moving ahead, if we look at the previous year questions, there was a question on the major outcomes of the 26th session of the COP to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So as we know, all the conference of party meetings, the agenda, the objectives, outcomes, and India's commitments to the same become important for both the prelims and the mains examination. Also, we have a question in 2015 prelims regarding the Green Climate Fund. So here, climate change and the associated funds actually become important. Moving ahead, let's look into the news. In the recently concluded COP28 meeting in Dubai, the countries had adopted a framework for the global goal on adaptation. So let us understand what is this framework all about. This was actually adopted at the UNFCCC meeting in Dubai, and it aims, that is this particular framework aims to increase the adaptive capacity, the resilience and the risk reduction of the vulnerable communities and ecosystems around the world to the vagaries of climate change. Now let us understand what is climate adaptation. Adaptation is nothing but it is the process of adjusting to the current and the future impacts of climate change. So how this adaptation is different from mitigation, let us actually see. So climate adaptation, it involves implementing strategies and policies in order to reduce the vulnerability of any particular ecosystem, and it actually aims at enhancing the resilience of that particular ecosystem to climate change. Whereas mitigation is nothing but it actually aims to lessen the severity of climate change by reducing the greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, namely CO2. So let us see. Mitigation versus adaptation. Mitigation is nothing but it makes the climate change less severe by preventing or reducing the GHG emissions, whereas adaptations, as I already told you, is the process of adjusting to the current or the future impacts of climate change. So now if you look at this infographic, we can see that adaptation actually involves a number of processes or strategies such as disaster management, flood protection, and any kind of infrastructural upgrades are actually involved in adaptation. And if you see mitigation, it is nothing but the action to reduce the emissions that cause climate change that can be curbed or prevented by using renewable energy, sustainable transportation, clean energy, and by increasing the energy efficiency. Moving forward, let us look at the key highlights of the GGA framework. So first one is the framework actually sets ambitious targets to all the countries that it has to achieve by 2030. So what the countries have to achieve by 2030. So in order to ensure this, it actually involves a number of processes like conducting the climate risk assessment in every country, developing the national adaptation plans, establishing early warning systems, and mobilizing the finance for adaptation, particularly with reference to the developing countries. Apart from setting the ambitious targets that have to be achieved, it also focuses on the need for concrete actions. These actions include infrastructural upgrades like building seawalls, improving water management, developing the climate resilient agriculture, and also protecting the various ecosystems that are vulnerable to climate change. Following this, there is a process of monitoring and evaluation. Okay, so it establishes a system for monitoring and evaluating the process with the indicators that are set at the regional level, the national, as well as the global level. Followed by this, the framework focuses on the need to enhance the support for the developing countries from the developed countries in terms of financial as well as technical support, and it actually aims to double the adaptation finance from the developed to the developing countries by 2025. Next one is focusing on equity and just transition. What does this mean? It ensures adaptation benefits actually reach not only the rich global economies but also the vulnerable communities, thereby promoting a just transition in the face of climate change. So these are the key highlights of the framework that have been adopted recently by the countries at the climate summit. Moving forward, let's look into a few of the challenges in implementing the GGA framework. The first challenge is lack of universal metrics. That is, as we discussed about mitigation as well as adaptation, mitigation has a certain metric. That is, if we actually reduce the carbon dioxide emission by few metric tons, that actually has a definitive reduction in the global temperature. However, the adaptation measures do not have a defined metric. So that is what they are saying here. Unlike mitigation, which relies on CO2 equivalents, adaptation actually lacks a standardized metric for measuring progress. Next one is the adaptation finance gap. The gap between the estimated amount or the cost of meeting the adaptation is different, whereas the ground reality of the available finance is different. For example, if we see that the estimate suggests that there is a need for 71 billion per year until 2030, but the availability of such funds is still uncertain. Also, in 2020, the developed countries' mitigation and adaptation finance fell short of the annual 100 billion goal because it reached only $83.3 billion. Followed by this, there is a mitigation bias. That is, throughout, or you can say historically, the climate financing trends have always been inclined to the mitigation strategies rather than focusing on the adaptation strategies. That is, the climate financing tends to favor the mitigation over adaptation. And the climate change regime has historically been mitigation centric, as we already discussed, and the rich countries can benefit more from this one and less from the adaptation efforts. Okay. So as the benefits are local, while the mitigation projects will actually offer global benefits. For example, any kind of mitigation strategy such as reducing the carbon dioxide actually has a global impact. Whereas any kind of infrastructural upgrade, which is a part of your adaptation measure, is only localized. So that is what is being discussed here. The benefits are local in case of adaptation strategies, while mitigation projects offer global benefits. Moving on, the split between the mitigation and the adaptation funds actually have a huge gap. While mitigation is 95 of the total 100 and the ratio stands 95:5, where 5 is actually the ratio, that is a ratio of the finance that is actually being given to the adaptation. The next news that we will be discussing about is Special Force for Security Crowd Management at Jagannath Temple in Puri. So here we'll be discussing about the Jagannath Temple and its architectural or characteristic features. So this particular topic becomes important from GS Paper 1, Indian Culture, Salient Aspects of Art Forms and Literature, and also can be mapped under current events of national importance. So moving ahead, we have a previous year question in 2021 on the Somnath Temple. So here we understand that the temples and the architecture is very important from the exam point of view. So why this particular temple is in news is that post-COVID-19, the Odisha government had sanctioned a specialized security battalion for the safety and crowd management at the Jagannath Puri temple. So as I told you, the Odisha government sanctioned a specialized security battalion for enhanced safety and crowd management at the Sri Jagannath Temple at Puri. So let us look into the characteristic features and the location of the temple. The temple is located in Puri, Odisha, and it is dedicated to Lord Jagannath, who is considered as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu in Hinduism. It is accompanied by his brother Lord Balabhadra and sister Devi Subhadra. Moving on, as I told you, he is considered to be an avatar or an incarnation of Lord Vishnu in Hinduism. So the temple was built in the first half of the 12th century by the founder or the ruler of the Ganga dynasty, Anantavarman Chodagangadeva. Also, this temple is called as the White Pagoda, and it is also a part of the Chardham pilgrimages, the other three being Badrinath, Dwaraka and Rameshwaram. So this is the architectural structure or the layout of the temple. So the temple complex is characterized by four important components. The first one is the Vimana or the Deol, which we also call as the Garbhagriha, which houses the three important triads or the deities of Lord Jagannath, Lord Balabhadra and Devi Subhadra. So this is the part of the Vimana, which actually is also called or houses the Sanctum Sanctorum, where it houses three important deities. Moving ahead, we have an adjoining antechamber, and this is called as the Jagamohan. The second component is called as the Jagamohana. This is nothing but here is the place where the offerings and rituals are carried out. Followed by this, we have a rectangular structure called as the Nata Mandapam, where we have the dance as well as cultural activities taking place. And adjoining this, we have a Bhog Mandapam, which serves food to the deities and also serves as an area where we have the dignitaries actually being there for dining and for other purposes. Moving ahead, we actually look at the architecture of the particular temple, that is Jagannath Temple. We have the Vimana or the Garbhagriha, which I also told you as the Sanctum Sanctorum. Followed by this is an adjoining antechamber with a pyramid-like structure or the pyramid-like roof called as the Jagamohana, which is also called as the audience hall. Next, we have the Nata Mandapam, which is nothing but dedicated to all these kind of cultural and the dancing activities. Followed by that is the Bhog Mandapam, which is nothing but the offering hall. So this is nothing but a remarkable example of Kalinga architecture. Kalinga architecture is characterized by curvilinear towers, elaborate carvings, and intricate sculptures. So the Jagannath Temple is an excellent example of Kalinga architecture, as it is characterized by curvilinear towers, elaborate carvings and intricate sculptures. Moving on, the temple stands in the center of the inner courtyard on a raised platform. It has four components, as I told you. One is the Vimana or the Dula, that is the Garbhagriha. The next is the Jagamohana, followed by Nata Mandapam and Bhoga Mandapam. Now let us look into what is Vimana or the Dula or the Garbhagriha. This is the main temple which actually houses the three deities, that is Lord Jagannath, Lord Balabhadra and Devi Subhadra. It is built in the Rekha-Dula style, which is characterized by a curvilinear tower, which is known as the Shikhar, which is rising from a square base. The crowning element which is atop the Shikhar, that is whatever is present above the Shikhar, is called as the Neela Chakra, which is nothing but an 8-spoked wheel which is made of 8 metals. Following this, we will look into the characteristic of Jagamohana. This is an antechamber adjoining the Vimanam used for rituals and offerings. It also features a pyramidal roof and it houses additional deities of Vishnu and Lord Lakshmi. Next is the Nata Mandapam, which is a rectangular hall for dancing and cultural performances, particularly during the festivals, and it has intricately carved pillars with a decorated ceiling. Moving ahead, we have the Bhog Mandapam, which is a larger hall used for offering food to the deities and serves as a dining area for the priests and the dignitaries during the festivals. This is similar in structure to that of Nata Mandapam. And also, what are the additional architectural features which are found here? The first one is the Panchatantra style. The Vimanam is built in the Panchatantra style, meaning that it has 5 projected structures which resemble the chariot on its sides. The other feature includes the Gajasimhas and the Jhampasimhas. These are nothing but these are sculptures of lions of the base temple, some which are resting that are called as the Gajasimhas and the others are leaping, that is nothing but the Jhampasimhas, which actually symbolizes power and vigilance. Moving ahead, looking at the wall carvings, the temple walls are adorned with intricate carvings that depict gods, goddesses, and mythical creatures, and also other scenes from the Hindu mythology. The next news that we will be discussing today will be the UNHCR, that is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, has thanked India for taking care of 142 Rohingyas intercepted in the Andaman. So this particular topic is relevant from GS paper 2, important international institution, agencies, their structure and the mandate. And here we will be discussing about UNHCR as the organization, the refugees, and what are the essential differences between the refugee, migrants, immigrants, as well as environmental immigrants, as well as asylum seekers. Then we'll look into who are the Rohingyas and finally India's refugee policy. So there has been a previous year question in 2021 where the refugees as well as the ethical dimensions of refoulement, that is sending back to their origin country where they fear persecution, was being asked. So here Rohingyas become a potential and an important topic for the UPSC examination. So let's get into the news. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee, that is the UNHCR, has expressed its gratitude to the Indian authorities in the Andaman and the Nicobar Islands for taking care of 142 Rohingya refugees whose boats were intercepted by the coastal security agencies. Okay, so moving forward, let us look into what is UNHCR. UNHCR was established in 1950 in the aftermath of the World War in order to help millions of Europeans who had fled or who had lost their homes. What is the goal of this organization? Its goal is to save lives, to protect their rights, and to build a better future for the refugees who have been forcibly displaced and who have become stateless overnight or over a period of time. How does it operate? It provides vital assistance like shelter, food, water, and medical care to those who have been forced to flee due to conflicts, persecutions, or disasters. Moving forward, what are its long-term principles? They include repatriation, integration, or resettlement to third countries. Moving forward, India's policy on refugees. As far as India's policy on refugees is concerned, India does not have any kind of a legal framework with respect to that of refugees. We are neither a signatory of the 1951 Refugee Convention nor its protocol, which came into force in 1967. However, we follow the principle of non-refoulement, where we do not force the refugees into their origin countries where they have the fear of potential persecution. Also, India follows a tradition of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, which means the world is one. Moving ahead, India is a culturally inclusive country where India's tradition of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, that is the world is one family, fosters a sense of empathy and hospitality towards the refugees despite we having the legal limitations. Also, as I told you, we do not have a specific legal framework for refugees, but we handle their matters on a case-by-case basis. Also, we are not a signatory to the 1951 Convention or its 1967 protocol, and we adhere to the principle of non-refoulement. Moving ahead, we are guided by India's security interests. That is, following the Sri Lankan Civil War, India had granted temporary refuge to hundreds of thousands of Tamil refugees, while India maintains a more cautious approach towards the Rohingya refugee due to the diplomatic considerations and the complicated situations that we share with Myanmar. Moving ahead, the geopolitical implications. India's policies towards the refugee groups like Tibetans and the Bangladeshis are influenced by the complex relations that we share with the other neighboring countries like China and Bangladesh, respectively. Also, now let us look into who are Rohingyas. The Rohingyas are a Muslim minority or an ethnic Muslim minority who are said to inhabit the Rakhine state of Myanmar. Also, they are perceived to be the most persecuted refugees in the world. So, as I told you, the Rohingyas are a Muslim ethnic minority group primarily residing in the Rakhine state of Myanmar. They have been described as one of the most persecuted minorities in the world, and they have been denied of citizenship under the Myanmar law, and they have also faced a number of human rights abuses leading to mass displacement and refugee crisis, because of which they have fled to the neighboring countries of Bangladesh and India respectively. Moving forward, let's look at the differences between the asylum seekers versus migrants, immigrants, as well as environmental immigrants with examples. So first, who is a refugee? A refugee is a person who is forced to leave their country and who flees out of their country due to the armed conflict or persecution, and they do not know where they will possibly or potentially end up. Whereas a migrant is a person who voluntarily chooses to move out of his present country, and there is no direct threat of persecution or death, and this is mainly to improve the standard or the quality of life. And this is mostly with respect to finding work. Example, Indians migrating to US in search of job for a better quality of life. Next one is the environmental migrant. These are the people who flee from natural disaster but still enjoy the government's protection. Next comes the asylum seeker. Asylum seeker is a person who left the country and who has applied for the refugee status and is awaiting for the decision of their application. And this should not be confused with that of a refugee, because a refugee already has status of a refugee and it is not pending any kind of decision. So now let us actually look into the different categories with the respective examples. Migrants, they actually move in seeking better opportunities or for improved standard of living. For example, Indian nurses in the UK healthcare system, and we have the Chinese students at the American universities. Next is the immigrants who actually settle permanently in another country. For example, Indians applying for green card in the United States. Moving on is the asylum seeker who flee persecution or serious harm, but then they have the pending determination of the refugee status. That is, a decision of giving them the refugee status is still pending from the government. For example, the Belarusian journalist applying for asylum in Lithuania. The next one is refugees who are forced to flee due to well-founded fear of persecution. And here we have the Palestinian refugees as well as the recent Rohingya refugee crisis can be stated here, and these people are granted refugee status for protection. Next, the final one is the environmental migrants who are displaced due to environmental catastrophes or disasters, and there is no specific legal framework which guards the same. And for example, is the Tuvaluan communities relocated to New Zealand due to rising sea levels. The next topic that we will be discussing about is women participation in NREGS, that is the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, has continued to rise, that is to 59% this fiscal. So this particular topic becomes important from GS Paper 1, Condition of Women and Women Empowerment, and GS Paper 2, Welfare Schemes of Vulnerable Sections of the Population. Also, this becomes important from women employment, women empowerment, as well as the scheme actually becomes important. So moving ahead, we actually have previous year questions that have been asked on women and globalization, gender budgeting and women empowerment, and also on the continued challenges that women in India actually face. So here, women as a topic becomes important for both prelims as well as the mains examination. Moving forward, so why this particular topic is in news is that if we actually assess the trends of the women participation in the MGNREGS scheme, we can see that there has been a rise in the percentage from the earlier 54.8% in 2014-15 to the current 59% in 2023-2024. So getting into the news, where we already saw that women participation in the NREGS scheme has continued to rise to 59% this year, and this has been the highest in the last decade, and there has been a marked increase from 57.47% from the previous year to the current 59%. Moving ahead, the regional variations in the women participation, we see that the southern states actually have performed better than the northern states, specifically with Kerala topping the table with 89% of women actually participating in the scheme, followed by Tamil Nadu, Puducherry, Goa with over 70% participation. And if we see the states that have actually lagged behind, it include Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, which are actually below 40%. However, the positive thing is that there have been improvements in the low-performing states when compared to that of the previous year. If we look at the national trends in the female labor force participation, there has been an increase to 30.5% in the rural areas in 2022-23 from the former 18.2% in 2017. Also, there has been a decline in the unemployment rate, where the female unemployment rate dropped to 1.8% from the earlier 3.8% in 2017-18. What are all the overall implications? So there is a positive shift in the trend, which is actually towards the positive gender equality in the Indian society. And also this shows a positive and effective implementation of the government policies. Also, women seeking job will lead to a social change that will lead to the overall development of India's economy. So if we see indication of gender equality progress, it has reflected a shift towards greater gender equality in the labor market. And impact of the government policies, this demonstrates the effectiveness of policies aimed at encouraging the female labor force participation. And as I told you, there is a positive trend in women seeking and obtaining employment, which is crucial for the overall development of the economy. Moreover, if we see that India actually has a persistent issue of structural inequalities as well as injustices, okay, where women are more concentrated in manual and low salaried employments. Specifically, post-COVID-19, we will see that women have remigrated from the urban to the rural areas as they were found unsuitable for high-skilled labor. So, it also signifies that women have migrated towards the rural areas and they are getting less opportunities in skilled jobs. So this actually calls for a need to strengthening the skill development programs and other policies of the government. So here, let us quote the Global Gender Gap Report 2023. This has found that the global gender score was 68.4%. And there has been an increase or a better performance of around 0.3 when compared to that of the previous year. Also, if it is found that if this situation continues, it actually would take 131 years to reach gender parity. Now looking at India's performance. India has ranked 127th out of the 146 countries, and there has been an increase in its previous ranking. This has been an improvement from its earlier ranking of 135. Also, what are all the different policies that the government has brought into force in order to enable the gender equality? Some of them include Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. This is nothing but it actually focuses on education of the girl child, followed by Mahila Shakti Kendra, which aims to empower rural women and also for the skill development of the same. Next includes the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. This is for the economic empowerment of women and also for their financial inclusion. Next, a number of female entrepreneurship. And finally, Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya. which have been opened in the educationally backward blocks. And also, if you see, there have been political reservation for women where the 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act mandated for reservation of 1/3 seats for women in the local governance like the Panchayati Raj as well as the municipalities, and the recent Women Reservation Bill 2023 mandates for a 33% reservation for women in the legislative assemblies. Now let us solve certain prelims as well as mains practice questions. The first question, consider the following statements with Jagannath Puri Temple. It was constructed in the 12th century by King Anantvarman of the Eastern Ganga dynasty. This is correct. It is an integral part of the Chardham pilgrimages joining the ranks of Badrinath, Dwarka and Rameshwaram. This is also correct. So which of the following given above is or are correct? Since both the statements are correct, it is answer C, that is both 1 and 2. Moving ahead, the second question. Consider the following statements. Immigrants are automatically granted citizenship upon arrival in a new country. No, this is wrong. Asylum seekers have already been granted the refugee status and enjoy full legal protection. No, this is wrong. They are pending and the decisions are pending before the government. Environmental migrants are primarily motivated by economic opportunities. No, they flee the country because of economic disasters. So this is also wrong. The 1951 Refugee Convention outlines the rights of both the refugee and the migrants. No, this is also wrong. So which of the above statements are incorrect? Since all are wrong, the answer will be option D. Moving ahead, consider the following statements regarding MGNREGS scheme of the central government. It guarantees 100 days of employment in every financial year to adult members of any household. No, this is wrong. It is rural household willing to do public work related unskilled manual labor. So this is wrong. Southern states of India have less women participation. No, this is wrong. Here, Kerala has actually ranked number 1 with 89% enrollment, followed by Tamil Nadu, Puducherry and Goa. So this particular statement is wrong. Overall, women participation has steadily increased in the last 5 years. No, this is wrong. In 2019 to 2020, there has actually been a dip. So it has not been steadily increasing. So how many of the above statements are incorrect? Since all the statements are incorrect, the answer will be C. The fourth question, it reads, consider the following statements about ASEAN. India is a member of ASEAN. No, this is wrong. Indonesia is among the founding members of ASEAN. This is correct. The objective of the ASEAN is to promote economic and security cooperation among its members. This is correct. So from the options, we can see that 2 and 3 are correct. So answer will be B. The fifth question, consider the following statements about climate adaptation. Climate adaptation involves strategies to prevent or reduce the GHGs. No, this is wrong. It focuses completely on adaptation following the climate change. It includes the policies and actions to reduce the vulnerability and enhance resilience to climate change. Yes, this is correct. So it is option B. So now let us solve the mains practice question. The question reads, assess the significance of ASEAN for India, highlighting the multifaceted aspects of this relationship and discuss the challenges and potential strategies for enhancing the partnership. So here, the approach would be, in the introduction, we will actually introduce ASEAN's relevance to India's foreign policy and the regional strategy. And in the body, where we'll discuss about the significance of ASEAN for India, for example, its market potential, its maritime security, the cultural ties we have, as well as the development of the Northeast region. Then we'll discuss about India's cooperation with ASEAN over the years on political relationship, economic ties, security, defense, and tourism. Following that, we will actually mention the challenges in India-ASEAN relations such as the trade deficit, the bilateral preference, the connectivity, etc. So moving ahead, in the conclusion, we'll actually discuss different points such as boosting connectivity, both physical as well as digital connectivity, the global collaboration, that is a joint efforts in international forums, the expansion to Quad Plus, from the present Quad, which is actually an association between the India, US, Japan and Australia to other countries like New Zealand, South Korea, etc. And finally, mention about the maritime security focus, which will protect the Indo-Pacific interests. So we are done with the daily news analysis. For regular updates, please like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you.